If you sign that, you lose everything," Emily said quietly, but the room was too polished, too confident, too certain to hear a waitress over the sound of a $50 million deal closing, and Daniel Whitmore didn't even pause, his Mont Blanc pen gliding across the final page as if he had signed 1,000 contracts just like it. Because he had, because men like him didn't make mistakes. Not in boardrooms overlooking Manhattan, not with partners who wore tailored suits and spoke in perfect numbers, not with a team of lawyers standing just feet away. And yet Emily stood there, still as the glass walls behind her, her tray balanced perfectly in one hand, her eyes not on the CEO, but on the man across from him, the one smiling just a second too long, the one whose watch was set 3 hours ahead, London time maybe, or somewhere further, somewhere intentional. And it wasn't just that. It was the way he tapped the table twice before speaking, the way he avoided clause references, unless prompted, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes. And Emily had seen that before, not here, not in this restaurant filled with quiet wealth and controlled conversations, but somewhere else, somewhere that didn't serve steak at $80 a plate, somewhere contracts didn't just cost money, they cost people everything. And her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the tray, a small movement, invisible to everyone except someone looking for it, but no one was looking at her, not really. To them she was part of the background, like the soft music or the dim lighting, useful, invisible, replaceable. And Daniel finished signing, sliding the contract across the table with a calm confidence that came from years of winning, while the partner leaned forward, just enough, just right, reaching for the document with a hand that looked steady but moved a fraction too fast. And that was when Emily stepped closer, just one step, her voice low, controlled, almost lost in the air. "Don't trust him," she said, and for a moment, just a moment, something shifted, not in the room, not in the power dynamic, but in the silence between her words and his reaction, because Daniel didn't look up, didn't acknowledge her, didn't even blink. He simply adjusted his cuff, the silver of his Swiss watch catching the light as if to remind everyone exactly who he was, a man who didn't take warnings from waitresses, a man who didn't hesitate. And Emily didn't repeat herself, didn't insist, didn't explain. She just stepped back, returning to stillness, her eyes lowering slightly, but not before catching one last detail, the partner's expression flickering, just for a second, the kind of flicker that only happens when someone thinks they've already won. And then Daniel's phone buzzed against the table, sharp, unexpected, breaking the rhythm of the moment, his name flashing across the screen, his lead counsel calling. And something in the tone of that vibration felt different, heavier. And as Daniel reached for the phone, for the first time since Emily spoke, his movement slowed, just slightly, just enough for doubt to slip in where certainty had been. And across the table, the partner's smile didn't fade, but it changed, becoming tighter, quieter, waiting, because he knew something Daniel didn't, or thought he did. And Emily watched it all unfold in silence, knowing exactly what was about to happen next. Daniel did not answer the call right away. He stared at the screen as if willing it to be wrong, as if instinct alone could undo what had already been set in motion. And then he answered, his voice calm but lower than before, controlled but no longer effortless. "This is Whitmore." And the voice on the other end did not waste time. It never did. "Do not finalize that contract. Clause 14 subsection C transfers conditional control under foreign jurisdiction." And for the first time in years, Daniel felt something unfamiliar press against his chest. Not fear, not yet, but the sharp edge of it, the realization that something had slipped past him, something precise, intentional, designed to be invisible. And his eyes moved slowly back to the document, scanning the lines he had already signed, the language suddenly different, heavier, each word carrying weight he had not measured before. And across from him, the partner leaned back slightly, his posture relaxed, almost patient, as if he had already anticipated this exact moment, as if he had seen this reaction before. And that was when Daniel noticed it, not the words, not the clause, but the man, the way his fingers rested too comfortably on the table, the way his gaze did not chase control but waited for it to collapse on its own. And something cold settled into place, because this was not negotiation. This was a setup. And Daniel ended the call without another word, the silence in the room stretching thin, his legal team shifting subtly behind him, unsure, recalculating. While the partner finally spoke, his voice smooth, almost amused. "Is there a problem, Mr. Whitmore?" And Daniel did not respond immediately, because now he was looking somewhere else, not at the contract, not at the man across from him, but at the reflection in the glass behind them, where Emily stood exactly where she had been, still, composed, as if nothing had changed, and yet everything had, because she had seen this before, because she had known. And Daniel's jaw tightened just slightly before he pushed the contract back across the table, not abruptly, not dramatically, just enough to shift the balance. "We will need to review this again," he said, his tone steady but no longer casual, and for a fraction of a second the partner's smile flickered, just a crack, just enough to confirm what Emily already understood. And that was when Daniel stood, turning fully this time, not toward his team, not toward the exit, but toward her, his eyes narrowing not in anger, but in focus. "You," he said, not loudly, but clearly enough that the room followed his gaze. And for the first time, every eye in that polished space landed on the waitress no one had noticed before, and Emily did not flinch, did not rush. She simply stepped forward, placing the tray down with quiet precision, her movements calm, deliberate, as if she had been waiting for this exact moment. And when she spoke, her voice was the same as before, steady, unshaken. "He shifted jurisdiction through layered clauses," she said, as if explaining something simple, something obvious, and Daniel stared at her, really stared now, because that was not a guess, that was not instinct, that was knowledge, specific, trained, and the question formed before he could stop it. "How do you know that?" And Emily held his gaze for a brief second, just long enough to show there was more beneath the surface than the uniform suggested, before answering softly, "Because I have seen contracts like this before." And in that moment the power in the room tilted, not loudly, not visibly, but undeniably, because the man who controlled everything was now listening to someone he had not even acknowledged 5 minutes ago. The room did not move, but something inside it shifted, subtle and irreversible, like air pressure before a storm. And Daniel did not break eye contact as he stepped closer, studying her now not as staff, not as background, but as a variable he had failed to account for. And that alone unsettled him more than the contract ever could, because mistakes in business could be corrected, but blind spots were dangerous. "That is not something people just recognize," he said quietly, his voice no longer carrying authority for the sake of others, but precision for himself. And Emily did not respond immediately. She let the silence sit, let it stretch just long enough to make the room lean in, her posture straight but relaxed, her hands resting lightly against the table edge. And when she finally spoke, it was without hesitation. "Clause 14 is written to look standard, but the jurisdiction reference is layered under international arbitration language. It redirects control if triggered under foreign dispute," she said, each word measured, clear, undeniable. And Daniel felt it again, that sharp edge, because she was not explaining, she was confirming. And behind him one of his attorneys stepped forward, flipping quickly through the document, eyes scanning, breath catching just slightly as realization caught up. "She is right," he said, the words quieter than expected, almost reluctant. And across the table the partner's calm began to thin, not visibly to most, but to Daniel it was obvious now, the slight tightening at the corner of his mouth, the pause before his next breath, the loss of rhythm. And that was all Daniel needed, because power was not always loud. Sometimes it was the moment someone lost control without anyone noticing, and he turned back fully, no longer the man who had signed without looking, but the one who now understood exactly what had almost happened. "You tried to move ownership through a conditional trigger," he said, his voice steady, controlled, but colder now. And the partner leaned back, attempting to recover the balance. "That is a misinterpretation," he replied smoothly. But it landed differently this time, because now there was doubt in the room. Now there was space for it. And Emily watched it unfold without expression, without satisfaction, just quiet certainty, because this was not new to her, not the pattern, not the tactic, not the moment when confidence began to fracture. And Daniel's gaze returned to her once more, sharper now, searching. "Where did you learn this?" he asked, not as a challenge, but as a necessity, because there was no version of Reality where a waitress should be able to dismantle a contract faster than his legal team. And Emily met his eyes again, calm, unflinching. But this time there was something else there, something deeper, something held back. I used to review contracts like this, she said simply, and the understatement of it hung heavier than any explanation could, because people who used to do things like that did not end up here by accident. And Daniel understood that much immediately, the gap between who she appeared to be and what she had just done was too wide to ignore, too precise to dismiss. And for the first time in years, he realized that the most important person in the room had been the one no one thought to notice, and the deal in front of him was no longer the biggest question. She was. The silence did not break all at once. It fractured slowly, like glass under pressure. Each person in the room recalculating their position, their assumptions, their next move, and Daniel remained still for a moment longer, his mind no longer on the deal, but on the anomaly standing in front of him, because nothing about this made sense unless there was more, and there was always more. Used to, he repeated. Quietly, the word carrying weight now, not as curiosity, but as a problem he needed to solve, and Emily did not look away, but she did not elaborate either, because explanations were not something she offered freely, not anymore, not in rooms like this. Not to people who only started listening when something was at stake, and Daniel noticed that too. The restraint, the precision, the way she chose silence over detail. And it told him more than any answer could, because people who had nothing to hide did not measure their words so carefully. And behind him his legal team was already moving, pulling copies, cross-checking language, confirming what had almost been lost, while across the table the partner's confidence continued to thin, replaced now by a controlled urgency. "This is unnecessary," he said, his tone sharper, less polished. "We can clarify any misunderstandings." But the word misunderstandings landed flat, because there was no confusion left, only exposure, and Daniel turned back to him, not with anger, not with raised voice, but with something far more dangerous, clarity. "There is nothing to clarify," he said evenly, sliding the contract further away, out of reach, a small movement that shifted everything, and the partner's hand paused mid-air before retreating, just slightly, just enough, and that was when Daniel made his decision, not about the deal, but about something else entirely, because deals could be renegotiated, replaced, recovered, but information like this, insight like this, that was rare, and he had almost ignored it, almost dismissed it, almost lost it. And that realization settled deeper than any financial risk. So he turned again, fully this time, the room fading behind him, the deal becoming background noise. "You are not just a waitress," he said, not as a question, but as a conclusion, and Emily's expression did not change, but something in her eyes shifted, just slightly, a flicker of something guarded, something that had been buried for a long time. "I serve tables," she replied calmly, and it was true. But it was not the answer he was asking for, and Daniel knew it. And for the first time in years, he did not push immediately, did not demand more, because instinct told him that whatever had brought her here was not simple, and not something that would be revealed under pressure. So instead he studied her in silence, noting the details he had missed before, the way she stood, balanced, controlled, the way her gaze never wandered without purpose, the way she had read a room full of executives faster than any of them had read a contract. And it did not align with the role she played, not even close, and that disconnect pulled at him, because he had built his entire life on understanding patterns, on predicting outcomes, and she did not fit any of them. And that meant one thing: there was a story here, one that explained everything he had just witnessed, one that turned a waitress into the most precise mind in the room. And as the staff around them hesitated, unsure whether to intervene or disappear, Daniel made a quiet decision, one that had nothing to do with the man across the table anymore. "Walk with me," he said, his voice lower now, directed only at her. And for a moment Emily did not move, not out of defiance, but consideration, because stepping away meant something, meant crossing a line she had carefully maintained. But then she placed the tray down completely, her fingers releasing it with deliberate calm. And without another word, she followed him, leaving behind a room that was no longer the center of anything, because whatever came next mattered more. The hallway outside the private dining room felt different, quieter, stripped of the polished tension that filled the space they had just left, and Daniel slowed his pace only slightly, enough to let the noise fade behind them, enough to think clearly again, because whatever had just happened was no longer about the deal, it was about her, and he did not like unknown variables. Not when they appeared out of nowhere and changed the outcome of something he had already controlled, and Emily walked a step behind, her movement steady, unhurried, as if she had walked away from rooms like that before, as if leaving power behind did not intimidate her, and that alone caught his attention more than anything she had said, because most people adjusted their posture around him, their tone, their presence, but she had not once. And when they reached the end of the corridor, near a large window overlooking the city, Daniel stopped, turning to face her fully, the skyline stretching behind him, lights flickering across the glass like distant signals. And for a moment neither of them spoke, the silence no longer uncomfortable, but deliberate, measured. And then he asked, not sharply, not accusingly, but with a quiet precision that demanded truth. What happened? And Emily's eyes moved briefly to the window, not to avoid him, but to gather something, a thought, a memory, something she had kept contained for a long time. And when she looked back, her expression was still calm, but no longer distant. I used to work in compliance, she said, her voice even, controlled, corporate risk analysis, contract review, fraud patterns. And Daniel did not interrupt, did not question, because every word fit too well with what he had seen, too exactly, and yet it did not explain the rest. The uniform, the tray, the quiet life she had chosen, and he stepped closer, not imposing, but focused. People do not leave that without a reason, he said, and this time there was a pause, longer than before, heavier, because this was not about knowledge, this was about history, and Emily exhaled slowly, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge of the window frame, grounding herself in something real, something present. Before answering, sometimes you see too much, she said softly, and sometimes the wrong people realize you saw it. And the words settled between them, not dramatic, not detailed, but enough, more than enough for someone like Daniel to understand the implication, because in his world, information was currency, and the wrong information in the wrong hands could change everything. And he studied her again, not as a puzzle now, but as someone who had made a choice, to step away, to disappear, into a life where no one asked questions, where no one expected answers. And yet here she was, stepping back into that world for a moment, just long enough to stop something from happening again, and that realization shifted something inside him. Not admiration, not yet, but respect, quiet and undeniable. You saved me a significant loss, he said finally, his tone steady, but different now, less distant, more grounded, and Emily shook her head slightly, a small motion, almost dismissive. I stopped something I recognized, she replied, and that difference mattered, because she did not see it as saving him. She saw it as correcting a pattern, and Daniel understood that too. The discipline, the instinct, the inability to ignore something once you knew it was wrong. And for a moment he said nothing, just looked at her, the city lights reflecting in the glass behind her, and then he made a decision, not impulsive, not emotional, but calculated in a way that felt different from his usual choices. You should not be here, he said quietly, not as judgment, but as fact, and Emily's gaze did not waver. I am exactly where I chose to be, she answered, and there was no hesitation in it, no regret, just certainty, and that, more than anything else, made him pause, because certainty like that did not come from failure, it came from experience. And as the silence settled again, Daniel realized something he had not expected, that this was not the end of the situation, not even close, because whatever had brought her here was still unresolved, still connected to the world he operated in, and now that he had seen it, he could not ignore it either. Daniel did not respond right away, because what she said did not fit neatly into any category he was used to. It was not ambition, it was not regret, it was something else entirely, something quieter but far more stable, and he had built his entire life on understanding motivation, on predicting why people made the choices they did, and yet hers did not align with any pattern he recognized. People do not walk away from that level of access unless they have to, he said finally, his voice low, not pressing, but not letting it go either, and Emily's gaze shifted slightly, not away from him, but through him, as if she was looking past the moment, past the conversation, into something older, something already decided. I did not walk away, she replied softly. I stepped out before it closed in. And Daniel understood the distinction immediately, because there was a difference between leaving and escaping, and the way she said it told him everything he needed to know without details, without names, without explanations that would only complicate what was already clear, and for a brief moment he said nothing, letting that settle. Because this was not a story he could dissect in seconds, not one he could solve with a single question, and behind them the faint sound of movement returned, the distant murmur of voices from the dining room. The deal still unresolved, the consequences still unfolding, but Daniel did not move, not yet, because something else had taken priority, something unexpected, and he looked at her again, not as a CEO assessing value, but as someone recognizing it. You could have said nothing, he said, and it was not a question, it was a statement of fact, because silence would have been easier, safer, expected, and Emily gave a small nod, almost imperceptible. Yes, she said, and that was all. No justification, no explanation, just acknowledgement. And that simplicity carried more weight than anything else she had said so far, because it meant she had made a choice, not out of obligation, not out of gain, but out of something internal, something that did not require recognition. And Daniel felt that shift again, deeper this time, not just respect, but something closer to trust. Cautious, unfamiliar, but present, and it changed the way he stood, the way he looked at her, the way he considered what came next, because people like her did not appear by accident, and they did not intervene without reason, and whatever she had stepped away from, it was still close enough to recognize, still relevant enough to act on. And that meant the situation was not isolated, not just one contract, not just one man across the table. It was part of something larger, something patterned, something repeatable, and Daniel's mind moved quickly now, connecting pieces, adjusting expectations, recalculating risk, and when he spoke again, his tone had shifted completely, no longer detached, no longer distant, but precise in a different way. He is not the first, he said, more to himself than to her. And Emily did not answer immediately. But the silence that followed was not empty. It was confirmation, and that was enough, because Daniel turned slightly, looking back toward the room they had left, the deal waiting, the man waiting, the implications unfolding, and for the first time since the meeting began, he was not thinking about what he almost lost, but what this could reveal, and when. He looked back at her. The decision had already been made, not impulsively, not emotionally, but with the same clarity that had built everything he owned. I need you to tell me what else you see, he said, not as an order, not as a request, but as a recognition of something he could no longer ignore. And Emily held his gaze for a moment, measuring, considering, not the question, but the man asking it. And for the first time, there was a slight shift in her posture, not hesitation, not fear, but the weight of a boundary she had kept intact for a long time. And stepping past it meant something, meant returning to a world she had chosen to leave behind. And yet the pattern was there again, unfolding in front of her, and ignoring it had never been something she was good at. And after a quiet breath, she spoke, her voice steady, but carrying something deeper now, something resolved. If I tell you, she said, you do not get to ignore it. And Daniel did not hesitate, not this time, because he already knew the answer to that. I do not ignore things that matter, he replied, and for a brief second, something almost unspoken passed between them, not agreement, not yet, but alignment, and it was enough for her to nod, just once, because whatever came next, neither of them was walking away from it. Emily did not rush her answer, because what she was about to say was not something you delivered lightly, not something you explained in a single sentence and walked away from. It was a pattern, layered, deliberate, and once you saw it clearly, you could not unsee it. And Daniel waited, not impatient, not dismissive, but focused in a way that meant he understood the weight of what he had asked for. And when she finally spoke, her voice was calm, measured, but sharper now, carrying more certainty than before. He is not working alone, she said, and the words settled between them with quiet impact, because that changed everything. It shifted the situation from a single bad deal to something structured, something organized, something repeatable, and Daniel's expression did not change much, but his posture did. Just slightly, the subtle shift of someone recalculating a larger field. Go on, he said, and Emily glanced briefly back toward the dining room, not to check the man, but to track the timing, the rhythm, the way things were moving without them. And then she continued, the clause you caught is not designed to trigger immediately. It activates under dispute conditions, meaning he benefits when something goes wrong later, not now, she explained, and Daniel's mind moved quickly, connecting that to long-term leverage, delayed control, strategies that were harder to detect because they relied on future complications rather than present advantage. And Emily stepped slightly closer to the window, her reflection faint in the glass, her eyes focused not on the city, but on the pattern she was describing. That kind of structure only works if there are multiple entry points, she said. Legal, financial, sometimes operational. And Daniel exhaled slowly, because he understood what that meant. It meant this was not about one contract. It was about infiltration, about setting conditions across different areas until control could be taken without resistance. And he looked at her again, more intently now. You have seen this before, he said, and this time it was not a question, and Emily nodded once, twice, she replied. And there was something in that number, something that suggested experience, not theory, something lived, something tested, and Daniel's jaw tightened just slightly, because two meant pattern, and pattern meant risk, not just to him, but to anything connected to this man. And for a moment neither of them spoke, the weight of that realization settling into something more concrete, more immediate. And then Daniel turned back toward the dining room, his reflection merging with the city lights behind him, his mind already moving ahead, not reacting anymore, but planning, adjusting, taking control back piece by piece. If he has done this before, he has left traces, he said, more to himself than to her. And Emily watched him carefully, measuring the shift, because this was the moment that mattered, the moment where most people either pulled back or leaned in. And Daniel did not hesitate, not this time, not after what he had just seen. And when he turned back to her, there was no trace of the earlier dismissal, no distance left, only focus. I need to know where to look, he said, and Emily held his gaze, steady, deliberate, because this was the line she had warned him about, the one that once crossed, changed everything. And after a brief pause, she spoke again, her voice quieter now, but heavier, carrying the kind of truth that did not need volume. Start with the companies he has already touched, she said. Look for deals that looked successful at first, but shifted control later, quietly. And Daniel nodded once, because that was enough, more than enough to begin. And as the silence returned, it was no longer uncertain, it was aligned, because both of them understood what came next, and neither of them was stepping away from it. Daniel did not wait this time. The moment she finished speaking, he was already moving, not rushing, but decisive, the kind of movement that came from clarity rather than urgency. And as they stepped back toward the dining room, the energy inside had shifted, conversations quieter now, more cautious, the partner no longer relaxed, his posture tighter, his attention divided, because something had changed even without them saying a word. And Daniel re-entered the room with a different presence, not louder, not more forceful, but sharper, controlled in a way that made people pay attention without understanding why. And he did not sit immediately. He remained standing, his hand resting lightly on the back of the chair, his eyes on the man across from him, studying not the surface, but the reactions, the micro-pauses, the adjustments that only appeared when control began to slip. And Emily stayed a step behind, silent again, returning to the position everyone expected. But now the difference was undeniable, because Daniel knew, and that changed everything. We are going to pause this deal, he said calmly, his voice even, leaving no space for negotiation, and the partner smiled. But it was thinner now, more calculated. That would be a mistake, he replied, leaning forward slightly, trying to regain the rhythm. Opportunities like this do not wait. And Daniel almost smiled, not from amusement, but from recognition, because he had heard that line before. Different words, same pressure, the push to move quickly before questions could settle, before patterns could be seen, and he shook his head once, slowly. "No," he said. "Mistakes happen when people rush." And the silence that followed was heavier this time, not uncertain, but controlled, because now Daniel was setting the pace. And across the table the partners' fingers tapped once, then stopped, a small break in composure that confirmed everything Emily had said, and Daniel let that moment sit, just long enough, before continuing. "We will review every agreement your firm has made in the past 5 years, he said, his tone steady, almost casual, but the impact immediate, because that was not a delay, that was exposure, and the partner's expression shifted, not dramatically, but enough. The first real sign that the situation had moved beyond his control. "That is unnecessary," he said quickly, and this time the smoothness was gone, replaced by something tighter, more urgent, and Daniel did not respond to the words. He responded to the change, the break in pattern, because that was what mattered, and he pulled the contract closer again, not to sign, but to hold it, to own the moment, to show that the decision was no longer about the document, but about everything connected to it. And then, without looking back, he spoke. "Emily," he said, her name clear in the quiet room, and every eye followed it, because now they all knew she was part of this, and she stepped forward without hesitation, her movements calm, precise, as if she had always belonged in this space. And Daniel gestured slightly to the document. "Show me," he said, and it was not a test, it was trust, given openly in front of everyone. And Emily leaned in just enough, her eyes scanning the page once more, not for answers this time, but for confirmation, and when she spoke, her voice was steady, quiet, but it carried through the room with a clarity that no one expected from someone in her position. "Clause 14 is not the only entry point," she said, her finger resting lightly on another section. "This one redirects arbitration under operational disputes, which means if performance is questioned, control shifts again." And the room stilled, because now it was undeniable, not a coincidence, not a single flaw, but a structure, layered, intentional. And Daniel watched the partner closely as she spoke, and there it was, the final break, the moment when the mask no longer held, when calculation gave way to reaction, subtle, but real, and that was all he needed, because the power in the room had fully reversed, not through force, not through volume, but through understanding. And as Emily stepped back once more, returning to silence, Daniel realized something he had not expected when the day began, that the most important voice in the room had been the quietest one, and he had almost missed it. No one spoke after that, not immediately, because the truth had already done what it needed to do. It had shifted the room without force, without argument, and Daniel let the silence hold, not out of hesitation, but control, because this was the moment where decisions settled into consequences, and he placed the contract down slowly, deliberately, as if closing something that should never have been opened. And across from him the partner no longer reached for it, no longer tried to guide the conversation, because the balance had changed in a way that could not be reversed, not with words, not with pressure, not anymore. And Daniel finally took his seat, not as a return to comfort, but as a signal that the meeting was no longer about negotiation, it was about conclusion. "This ends here," he said calmly, his voice steady, final, and the partner exhaled through a thin smile that no longer convinced anyone, nodding once as if accepting the outcome. But the pause before he stood revealed more than the gesture itself, because it was not agreement, it was retreat, and Daniel watched him leave without satisfaction, without triumph, just quiet understanding. Because this had never been about winning, it had been about seeing clearly before it was too late. And as the door closed behind the man, the room remained still for a moment longer, the kind of stillness that followed. Something significant, something that would not be discussed out loud but would be remembered. And Daniel turned slightly, his attention shifting once more, not to his team, not to the contract, but to her. And Emily stood where she had been, composed, almost unchanged, as if nothing about this had surprised her, as if she had already moved past the moment while everyone else was still catching up. And Daniel studied her quietly, the city lights reflecting faintly across the glass behind her. And for the first time, there was no distance left in his gaze, no dismissal, no assumption, only recognition. "You should not be invisible," he said, not as a compliment, not as an offer, but as a statement of fact, and Emily held his eyes for a brief second before responding, her voice soft but certain. Sometimes invisible is the only way to see everything. And the words stayed with him longer than anything else that had been said that night, because they carried a truth he had never needed before, but now understood, and Daniel gave a small nod, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement, because some things were not meant to be argued, only understood, and he reached into his jacket, pulling out a card, placing it gently on the table between them, not pushing it toward her, not insisting, just leaving it there. If you ever decide that where you are is not enough, he said quietly, I would listen the first time. And Emily looked at the card, then back at him, her expression unreadable for a moment, before something softened, not in emotion, but in decision, and she did not take the card immediately. She simply nodded once, the same quiet certainty she had carried from the beginning. Because she was not someone who moved quickly, not anymore, and Daniel understood that too, because for the first time, he was not trying to control the outcome. He was allowing it to unfold, and as he turned away, preparing to leave the room behind, the contract forgotten, the deal irrelevant, there was one thought that remained, clear and unshakable, that the most dangerous mistakes were not the ones you made, but the ones you almost made, and sometimes, the difference between the two was a voice you almost ignored.